I want to start with that second of my favorite Hans Hofmann quotes, and it's something we've talked about in the Q&A and in the Facebook group. So Hofmann said, "It's not the form that dictates the color, but the color that brings out the form." And I want you to remember what he meant by that was that we should not be painting objects in order to create a strong sense of color and light, but instead paint the major color masses. And that if we create those major color masses, we will by default, de facto, create those strong forms. So in this painting of the edge of a field, the illusion of that tall pine tree on the right-hand side that's being caught by the sunlight is created not by drawing a pine tree, but rather by painting the large color masses and then adding a light and a shadow plane for each one. That creates the illusion that there's a tall tree standing over a shadowed area of growth at the edge of the field and catching the light. What we'll cover today are three major topics. The first is how to look for those color masses that I was just talking about. The second is how to select color variations to describe those color masses. The third is how to use color modeling to create cues to form. So let's look a little closer at that first one, how to look for color masses. Many of the cues to do this and tips and tools to do this go back to the ones that we discussed in the introduction, learning how to see color. And I want to repeat that Hawthorne quote, "Think of color instead of sand. Think of color instead of clothes. Color first and house after. Not house first and color after." So just like Hans Hofmann, Hawthorne is advocating that you paint the color masses that you see instead of the objects. So that's our major task for this module, is to begin to see those color masses and paint those instead of painting things. So the three things that I think are really important in being able to see those color masses and then translate those into a painting, that first block in for a painting, goes back to the mantra that I've used in the past for creating a thumbnail. So you need to identify the 5 to 7 main shapes, not objects, but masses. So pick out the 5 to 7 main color masses in the subject that you're working with. Identify not just the value, that's what we focused on in composition, color, and light, but also the hue and the temperature for each of those shapes. That means your first pass at that subject is going to be one where you're scanning for the 5 to 7 main color masses and trying to identify in each of those color masses what the main hue, temperature, and value are for each one. Third, I want you to squint your eyes or use that color spot tool if you're having any trouble at all identifying the color. Trust your gut. Your gut is usually right. Try to let go of the objectness of what you're looking at. And some ways to do that are to squint your eyes so that you are simplifying the details, or to use the color spot tool. And remember that the color spot tool is simply a piece of cardstock with a hole punched in the center of it. That cardstock could be about 2 by 3 inches. Hold it up to look at the color mass to identify what the color is, the main color, the hue, value, and temperature that you're looking at. Notice I didn't say intensity, and the reason I didn't say that is I want us to use as many full intensity colors as possible for these color block-ins that we're working on. So assume that the intensity is going to be high. We're going to bump the intensity up if it appears dull to you as you're looking through the color spot tool. But really take advantage of those tools and techniques for identifying those main color masses for those 5 to 7 areas within the subject. So let's look at some examples of color masses. So let's look at the color masses here in the still life setup that we're going to be working with. So we have direct overhead light. It's casting strong light down onto the top of the cup, the top of the lime, and the base of the still life box. This has created what really is a very limited number of color masses. We have the color mass that is this background area, and I'm drawing really loosely here. This what looks almost black background, it was actually blue. So look how it was transformed by the light. So that background mass is one mass, our first mass. Then we have, let me get rid of that. Then we have the face of the cup right here that is primarily a blue color, and we can tell that by going to spot tool in Photoshop. So I can click on that and it pulls up this blue purple. We're going to make it a little bit bluer than purple, blue purple, blue violet, for a reason. And the reason is that we want to create difference. So if I do the spot check tool on that background color, it is blue violet. So we want to separate the mass of that face of the cup from the background. So we're going to increase the contrast in hue. So we'll make the face of the cup more blue and less violet. So that's why we are choosing the blue violet for the cup. Then we have the mass of this base area. Let me go back to my red for my drawing. And we have the mass of this base area here. You know, this whole big green space that all of these objects are sitting on. That is a color mass. So that's our third color mass. And if we do a check with a spot check, the color spot tool, which is the eyedropper in Photoshop, you can see over here that it is a green, a really intense green, because the light is hitting on it fairly strongly. Then we can also, get back to my contrasting drawing color. That's our third big mass, color mass. Our fourth is this lime right here with part of its shadow. And its major color is a dark, rich blue-green that you can see up here in the color swatch. There's one thing in particular I want you to note here in that line. Let me point that out. I want you to notice that there's not a huge separation in the color mass between the lime and its shadow. Do you see how they run together? That is because the colors are so close, they differ in temperature, a little bit warmer in the lime, a little cooler in the shadow, that you could read that as one color mass. I think it's an excellent example of identifying a color mass by color instead of by object. So again, reiterating what Hoffman and Hawthorne both were talking about, you want to paint the color mass, not the color object. Our second topic is how to select color variations to describe those color masses. First, explore the variations of intense color that are available to you with the color palette we're using. So as we review the color variations exercise, we explored some of the variations of intense color that you have to work with so that you know what's available. The best way to become aware of what's available is to experiment with a lot of different mixing options. We've also added some additional colors to our palette for this course, so make sure you're using the full range of possibilities. Use the chart that we create in the second lesson to identify what some of those variables are and what options are there for you to choose from. Second, if you need to use some neutrals, and there are definitely times when neutrals are important, use ones that are mixed from either complements or close complements. Remember, those that are colors that are opposite to each other on the color wheel. For example, red and green, purple and yellow, orange and blue. Those are going to be much richer than neutrals that you squeeze out of a tube. We're going to start when we block in, though, with full intensity color in order for us to have an intense spot to start with. So you will probably be intensifying the color you actually see in order to be able to create the maximum optical illusion of color. And as you've heard me say before, avoid adding so much white that you dull your colors. When you go through lesson 2 of this module, you'll be adding white to the main split primaries that we're using so that you can see what's going to happen when it tips over into being too much white and the color gets dull, so that you know how far you can go in adding white to still maintain intense color. I want you to avoid adding black altogether. So other than in the exercises when we're doing comparisons for value relationships, take black off your palette. It will totally dull down the colors that you're working with. So let's take a closer look at those color variations and options that we have available to work with the color palette. So here we have a chart made up of our colors, our transparent colors, the major split primaries with the addition of alizarin orange and dioxazine purple. I would strongly recommend as you go through lesson 2 that you make a chart that includes all the colors on your palette as a really strong reference tool to use later. But what you can see here right away is that colors have an inherent value based on their pigment and that pigment's position on the spectrum. So notice that Indian yellow is going to be on the position of about a value 4 on a 9-scale color value chart. And alizarin orange is going to be very close to a middle value, a number 5. The naphthol red, fanchon red is very close to a value 6. When we move to the crimsons, they become increasingly dark. The crimson is approximately a value 7, getting quite dark, maybe more unexpectedly dark than you realized. Ultramarine blue and phthalo blue both fall at about a value 8. And finally, dioxazine purple falls at about a value 9. So you can see that these colors have an inherent value to them. Be aware of that, and you can select one of those colors to be positioned as the main color for a color mass, just simply based on its inherent value. You can also use that inherent value in choosing what to mix with a color to lighten or darken it. For example, to lighten the fanchon red, which is right here on our colors chart, you can add Indian yellow to it, and it's going to lighten it and maintain its intensity. Whereas if you add white to it, as you can see here, it's going to begin to dull. Now there's a tipping point with all of these colors where the addition of white tips it into a dull color instead of intensifying it. And it's at a different spot for each one. So for the Indian yellow, it's going to be right here at that value 2. Same for the alizarin orange. For the fanchon red, naphthol red, it's going to be very little white that begins to dull it, because that's more of an opaque color to start with. The alizarin crimson, or Carl's crimson, any of the crimsons, it's going to be about the same point, but since they start darker, it means you've got 2 steps in there. So a middle gray, a middle value of 5 is going to be about where it starts tipping over. Same thing for the ultramarine blue. Its maximum intensity is at value 5 and 6, but it's still fairly intense at value 4. So this is still a fairly intense color. Same for phthalo blue. It's at its maximum intensity at 5 and 6 and begins to tip over at 4. Also for the purple, the dioxazine purple or Egyptian violet, maximum intensity at about a value 5 and still functioning at a high intensity at 4, but leveling off at 3. So once you've mixed that chart, it's going to make it so much easier for you to see where the intensity falls off as you add white to mix. So you can add white to mix lighter values with those especially transparent colors, but don't add so much that you tip over into the more dull versions and dull values. Instead, add a lighter but equally intense color, and you will maintain your intensity. Our third point is to use color modeling to create cues to form. So we're going to talk about several ways that you can use modeling, adding value variation, hue variation, temperature variation, to create those cues to form that both Hawthorne and Hoffman were referring to. So number 1, use color changes to break the major color masses into a light plane and a shadow plane. So what I mean by that is to use changes in hue, changes in temperature, and changes in value to break those 5 to 7 major color masses down into smaller variations that include a light plane and a shadow plane. Especially rely on changes in hue and temperature in addition to value. Remember, we worked mainly with value in composition, color, and light. I want you to fully explore changes in hue and temperature as we move through Catch the Light. If you're not sure which colors to select, use the color spot tool to compare the color relationships that you see in your subject. Use it to look at the light plane. Use it to look at the shadow plane to help you identify those colors. So now let's look at how we might use color modeling to create that strong sense of form in our paintings. So here we have our still life setup again that we talked about when we were talking about identifying the color masses. At this point, I want us to look at the painting we're going to create in Lesson 3 at how those color masses are translated into modeling. So here is the painted color block-in. And notice that for each of those 4 color masses that I identified, I've now added at least one additional value, temperature, hue change in order to give a sense of three-dimensionality or light illumination to the painting. So, for example, in that background, right over here, we have 2 colors. We have the blue-violet that was at the base, the bottom of that background blue sheet. We have a warm violet that was where the light was striking it. It's not a separate plane per se, but it is a separate section as far as the light is changing the mass. Then on the front face of the cup, we have the strong shadow that is created by the direct overhead light. Then we have a light plane on the side of the cup right here that is catching the light. And so you see a change both in hue from blue to orange and in value from darker to light, from about a middle value to about a value 3, so from a 5 to a 3, and in temperature from a cool to a warm. So I've employed all 3 factors as a change to indicate that light plane. Same thing happens down here in the lime. You have the basic shadow plane of the lime that's base color, and into the shadow it's casting on the base sheet of paper. And you have the highlight where the light is falling onto the lime. So there is a light plane. Notice how simplified the light planes are on both the cup and the lime. We're avoiding detail here. I just want you to see roughly 2 planes in each of those major color masses. Our final color mass is the base of the still life setup itself. It was covered with a sheet of green construction paper, but because of the strong overhead direct light, that green construction paper, which was a middle value, about a value 5, inherently, as far as local color and value goes, appears as about a value 3 because of the lighting. Then we have the shadow areas created on that plane by the two objects that are sitting on it. So this is a fairly simple look at the different modeling that you can use to create that sense of form on a simple still life. But let's look at a slightly more complex version, actually one we'll be exploring later. Turn off the final painting. Here we have a photograph that we're going to be working from in the future. It is a close-up of a pecan tree in a pasture, in a field, with strong overhead direct light. The same exact kind of light that we have in our still life setup. It's creating the same kind of planes, the same kind of color masses. So let's look at those. We have, get onto that layer, we have the background, and notice the background runs up into this shadow, that shadow on the tree mass. So this area right here, that is both background and the shadow underneath the foliage of the pecan tree. That's one mass, not the objects, not the trees in the background plus the trees in the pecan, but that dark mass of blue-green color. Then we have another color mass that's even darker. That is that front face of both the trunk of the tree and the foliage. Just like the front face of the cup, it is both much cooler and much darker. Our third mass is this lighter mass on the right-hand side of trees, of the foliage of the leaves that are being struck by sunlight, just like the top of the cup and the top of the lime. So now we have three color masses. Then we have another slight color mass indicated over here, very similar to the top of the tree. That light one over there. So the adjacent tree, same leaves, same as the top of the cup. It'd be painted the same way. That's our fourth. Our fifth is the equivalent to the base in the still life. It's that ground, the grass that the tree is resting on. It's the shadowed area of the pasture and the illuminated area. So that base, that is our fifth color mass. So we only have 5 basic color masses in this photograph. Then we have some additional lights and shadows within those basic color masses. But this is how I would break up the color masses that I see in this photograph. Let's go to the painting that I created based on that photograph. In this painting, you can see where I've used those color masses to create a fairly simple, much abstracted painting of that pecan tree in sunlight. Think about how close it is to the still life that we just looked at. And let's just look, for example, at that base, the grass. And let's look at the variations that we see in there. So let's just first show what area we're talking about. It's this whole bottom section. So the overall color mass is this yellow-green right here. Then we have several variations to create a sense of changing planes. We have a warmer yellow-green. It's really almost yellow, slightly duller, but mixed with that same cinnabar green, some Indian yellow, and a tiny little bit of pink. We also have a pink right here, slightly dulled pink, that is indicating another change in plane, and a darker, more blue-green color here, as well as here and here to indicate shadow planes. So you can see here in this painting how I've taken those basic color masses and then begun to explore how to use a light plane and a shadow plane to begin to define the forms that I saw in that subject. I hope this helps in seeing how you can use color modeling to create a strong sense of form in your paintings. So to wrap up what we've covered today, how to look for color masses, those 5 to 7 basic color masses, not objects, but masses. How to select color variations to describe those color masses, to explore the different options that we have available with our color palette, and how to use color modeling to create cues to form. So now I want you to do the work and make it real. Here are 3 things that you can do to take what we've talked about in the concept video and put it into practice before you even get to lesson 2 and lesson 3. Practice identifying those color masses, those 5 to 7 basic color masses in every subject. Explore, continuously explore a wide range of color variations. And really consider, I strongly urge, that you use full intensity color in your color modeling. Keep in mind that learning to do these 3 things and learning to put the practice of seeing color masses into effect is an ongoing, completely nonstop, never-ending educational practice. You never fully reach an end point. So I don't want people to feel like they're behind or like they have lots to cover to catch up to get to a certain point. It's an ongoing, evolving process. We all get stronger and better at this the more that we explore it. So I want to thank you for being here with me and look forward to exploring further color mass options with you in lesson 2 and lesson 3.